Hello and welcome to the Bellingham Real Estate Podcast. I'm Paul Balzotti. I'm here with Dani Colito. Welcome, Dani.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and today we are talking about the pros and cons of living in Bellingham.
Yep.
And what prompted me to want to do this podcast with you is you did a top 5 pros and cons of living in Bellingham video. There's a lot of realtors who've done these pros and cons videos, but I thought yours was really good. Maybe the definitive top 5 pros and cons of living in Bellingham video that's out there. But I wanted to, I thought it'd be fun to discuss some of those pros and cons in more detail. I'll give you some more of my thoughts of the video and then, we could just take it from there. So
Great.
Starting off with, let's back up a little bit here. So we both have our own backgrounds, right? I'm from Seattle originally. Moved up here. I've been up here over 20 years. I've been in real estate here over 20 years. Tell everybody your background a little bit, because your background influences the pros and cons.
It does. Yeah. The background and where I come from really influenced it, because it was really my perspective, my 5 top pros of living here and my 5 negatives of living here. And when I was making the video, I was really thinking, I wish I would have known all of this stuff before I moved here. So it was me taking an opportunity to give other people who are maybe thinking about moving here, this is what I like about it, this is what I not so much. But at the end of the day, it's all really worth it to live here, is kind of how I conclude it. But my background, so I'm from the suburbs of Chicago, and then I went to college.
Did you say Chicago? Is
Chicago.
there a little?
Da Bears.
Yeah.
So from Chicago suburbs, and then I went to college down in the city. And then I just really wanted to get out west, be by the scenic beauty. I'd been out here one time in my youth, and for some reason I was just always really called to come back. I did an internship at Nordstrom during my college days, and so then I ended up getting a job out here in Seattle working for them, and so that's how it really brought me out here.
What were you, the downtown or the Bellevue Nordstrom? What Nordstrom were you at?
I was both. I was in downtown, but then I was ultimately over in Bellevue.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. And then you worked your way up here, and you've been in real estate here for
4-ish years now.
4 years.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. So the first thing you brought up, that was the number one thing on your list, was the scenic beauty of the Northwest, which is hard to argue.
Yep. I think that's why it was my number one too.
Yeah.
That's the big thing brought me
So,
out.
and you literally, coming from Chicago, had you had trips over here, or what? Just in general, you're like, oh, the Pacific Northwest is beautiful, so that's it.
I had one trip here, and I went to Oregon. I was in California, kind of did the whole West Coast. And I think Washington was just a really underrated, under-talked about place of living, and I was really blown away by it. But where I'm from, everyone wants to come out and move in California. So that's what I always heard, California. And I was like, oh, I'll go move to San Francisco or LA and do fashion down there. And I really liked Washington. So it really drew me out here.
Yeah. So the scenic beauty draws you in. Obviously, we're just getting through the fall, colors changing, beautiful time of year, even now, even though it's a nasty windstorm today as we're recording. But what I wanted to add for sure about your top 5 on the scenic beauty of the Northwest being a reason to move to Bellingham and the Pacific Northwest in general. But really Bellingham and Whatcom County, massive amounts of national park, massive amount of hiking and everything like that. But really the recreation, I would put the recreation itself in a category of its own, because moving to Bellingham specifically, we have the interurban trails, right? We have just within the city itself. Yeah. And then just on the outskirts of the city, you have so many different amazing you have Oyster Dome, you have all these different, hiking trails. And then Galbraith Mountain, of course. So
Mount Baker.
And Mount Baker. Mount Baker. Bellingham, if you move to Bellingham, I would say Mount Baker is an amenity.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So people move here to have access to Mount Baker.
Yeah. But then, so it's kind of a double. That's almost its own list, because scenic beauty, you get to parts of Bellingham, you can look that direction and see Mount Baker. And there's the enjoyment of the beauty of that. But then there's the actual functional thing of being able to go skiing or hiking or whatever.
Totally.
But we are getting more and more people that that move here just for Galbraith Mountain, which is amazing.
Yeah, there are people who move here and they want to be on that mountain or really close to it. And I think the same goes with Mount Baker. I mean, just off of the video that I made, I had somebody reach out to me because they want to live closer to Mount Baker. And so I got connected with them and helping them find a cabin that way.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you when you get to Galbraith Mountain, you'll have these neighborhoods around Galbraith Mountain, and I don't feel like this was a thing 20, 30 years ago, but you get into the neighborhoods off of Lakeway, off of U Street, where pretty much all of those neighborhoods have these little trail accesses, even just that aren't even public accesses, out of those neighborhoods. And I would say, this is totally anecdotal, but maybe 20% of the people that live in those neighborhoods now are there for that access.
Oh yeah.
And so, so the recreation is definitely a big pull for Bellingham. And then another thing I wanted to add that was not on your list is, this is a personal thing for me, but golf.
Yep.
You have, I believe it's 12 or 13 golf courses in the general Bellingham Washington County area. Coming from Seattle, you have just less golf courses per capita. So the golf courses are much more expensive. They're much just harder to get on. So up here you could get on to a fabulous golf course and very easily, almost at any time, and play in less than 4 hours. Whereas in Seattle, it's more expensive. It's harder to get on decent courses, and it's 4.5 hours or longer because everything's packed.
Yep.
And so golf, and then breweries. Come on. Do you not drink beer?
I don't drink beer.
Okay.
No, I'm more of a wine person. And so I also love the access to wineries around here, especially the east side. But they're everywhere.
I mean, do you go to breweries sometimes just in social situations?
I go to breweries, and I think people love them so much too because you can bring your dogs and you can bring your kids. Yeah.
Yes. And so one of your other top fives, you talk about community, and to me, the breweries are interesting because they do bring in more of a sense of community. There's so many breweries here. It's kind of like a Bend now. Some of the best breweries really in the nation for certain types of beer, like IPAs and Structures, Colston, Boundary Bay, Wander. The list goes on. But you go to these places and you have the trivia nights. You have dog friendly. Most of them you have the maybe one of them is kind of a soccer one of them is kind of a sports one, a couple of them have no sports, but it's really a gathering place for a lot of locals, and it doesn't hurt that and that it's fantastic craft beer too.
And it's nice that they're outside, and I feel like I love
indoor
breweries.
Outdoor.
Yeah, indoor outdoor, and they put themselves in the neighborhoods, but I love the food trucks too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then they have more and more of them have NA, non-alcoholic beers.
They do, and they'll have cider and
ciders and wines.
Yep,
so whether you drink or not drink, it's just a fabulous amenity to Bellingham to have these places, all the different breweries here, and it just keeps growing. So
I wonder how many we have. Do you know how many we have?
Last I checked, I believe it was north of 12 to 15, somewhere in that range. Maybe it's closer to 15, but you're talking about 6 or 7 or 8 of the best breweries in the greater area. And I really think when you go from Bend to Portland to Seattle to Bellingham, those are 4 of the areas you think of when you think of some of the best beer really in the country. So yes, so those are definitely
beer and golf.
Yes, beer and golf. Sorry, not sorry, but those are good pros. And all right, so what else do we got? We also had the climate being mild.
Yes,
as a peak for Bellingham. Yes. Compare that to Chicago a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the weather in Chicago was a huge reason why I left. Just endless memories of wiping the snow off my car and then shoveling the driveway. And my dad would never buy a snowblower. So I think that's what it is, the PTSD.
Sounds like he wanted you to. But that's where you got that
strong,
great work.
hard worker.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Your work ethic.
He's so stubborn. But the snow, I would say the weather from where I come from, I would call it harsh. The winters could be really, really harsh, and then the summers could be really harsh, and we would have heat waves and 80 degrees and 90 degrees for just months. And my parents actually moved out here too to retire, and that was a big thing for them, was the weather. So for me, it's just like it's in the 40s and the 50s in the winter. So it's very mild. You don't have to be like scraping off your car all the time. And I think it maybe snows in Bellingham, I don't know, like a week or two. Like we don't get that much snow in the winter. So it's not that hard on your car. It's not that hard on, I know it's probably good for your house too and your body and everything.
Yeah, I think you're right. I would think that's fair to say. I usually say that there's 1 to 2 weeks of snow and ice.
Yeah.
Every winter we tend to get that. I think there's one winter I can think of in the last 10 years where there was none, but then there's a couple where there was multiple weeks.
More, I feel like.
Yeah, more
recently.
We've been
getting more lately. Yeah.
But you're still looking at the bulk of the winter where you're not in snow and ice.
Yeah. It's just rain.
Whereas in Chicago, the bulk of the winter, you are in snow and ice. Is that fair to say?
Correct. Yeah. Like vivid memories of taking my snow gear to school, which for my kids, they think that's like the best sounding thing ever. They think that's amazing. But it's a pain. It's such a pain in the butt. So
True.
Yeah.
True.
Nice here.
So mild climate. And then the last positive I wanted to talk about we're not going to cover all of them, but the last positive I definitely want to cover was no traffic. You said no traffic, which is a relative concept, right?
I feel like I should change that to like little traffic or a small amount of traffic, because we do have a little bit of traffic. We have a growing population. I think our population has grown a little quicker than maybe like our infrastructure was ready for. So there has been some traffic lately around like 5:30. I noticed it 4:30. But it doesn't compare to bigger cities.
Yeah. And I think that not only is there less traffic in general, but also the way that I think Bellingham is set up is, I think that let's say you live in West Seattle, there's really, when that bridge was down, it was a massive endeavor for everybody to get out of West Seattle. What's nice about the way Bellingham is set up is the freeway obviously is cutting through it, but then there's really anywhere you want to go, there's kind of 5 different ways to get there, and there's 2 or 3 that are almost the same. So even if during a quote unquote traffic hour, if you're trying to avoid, let's say, Sunset and Lakeway and Meridian, which are maybe your 3 corridors that gets some traffic during traffic hour, you could kind of work your way around it, and maybe you add a 10-minute drive turns into a 15-minute drive, but it's not like
it's not an hour.
No.
Yeah, it's not an hour.
No. And even the freeway, if there's an accident, of course, it's not as wide as some parts of the state. So then you could quickly have some traffic there if there's an accident. But if there's no accidents, there's almost never, pretty much from north of Everett. I mean, that's really the only, you'd either have to have an accident or you'd have to have some sort of construction happening in order to have actual traffic on the freeway between Mount Vernon and Canada. I mean, would that be fair to say? So,
for sure. Yeah. I mean, we just had a mudslide last week.
Yeah.
And other than that,
and that really cleared up in a day. Yeah. So I agree on the lack of traffic being a very good positive of Bellingham, but I think we did need to add an asterisk there that there's some traffic.
There is some, to mislead.
Yes. Okay, so let's touch on some of the positives. Of course, was the scenic beauty, all the recreation here. I brought up the beer and golf. To get more of the positives, you can watch her video, but let's cut some negatives. On the same note as the mild climate, we had rain and clouds, which is a legitimate thing. There's definitely people who potentially don't live here because of that, or move because of too much rain and cloud. When you compare that to Chicago, would you say that it's cloudier and rainier here, even though?
Yes.
I mean, yes.
Yeah, for sure. It is. It's like it's not even the rain; it's the gray and it's the clouds. And I mean, I don't even own an umbrella. And I think when I moved here, I thought that everybody was rolling around with umbrellas because I pictured it in my mind the way that it's put out there, that it's just raining all the time. So it's not raining all the time, but it is gray. And so you do need to go on a little vacation in January or get a vitamin D lamp or take vitamin D supplements. There are things that you can do to combat it. So it's not the end of the world, but it's gray. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the gray, I mean, more cloud cover for more parts of the year. Obviously, we have fabulous summers and spring, and you can get these sunny days, of course, any time of year. But definitely more cloud cover. I would say that on the weather thing, with the rain, I think that what a lot of people don't know that you kind of just touched on was it tends to rain for, like today, for example, when we were filming this, it was rainy and windy this morning. And then we looked out the window and it's sunny with a rainbow right now. And so it tends to, if we ever have a day where it's raining all day, everyone's like, wow, this is bad.
We'll flood.
It tends to rain for a couple hours. Then a lot of times in the afternoon, it'll break up for a few hours. And so in the fall, in the winter, and in the spring, we'll kind of have these mixed days a lot. So, for better or for worse, which for a golfer like me, you can then, or anybody doing any sort of recreation, if you just want to go for a run or a bike ride, you can kind of find a few hours most days to where you can still get out and do things.
Oh, for sure. And then I think I heard the saying here, there isn't bad weather, there's just bad gear. So you just have to have really good gear.
That's a good point, yeah.
I have lots of it here. Yeah.
Yeah, you get all those mountain bikes that have they got the big fat tires for when they're going in the mud.
And the jackets and I see people running in the rain, biking in the rain, everything. Yeah.
No doubt. And you also touched on something else. If you're fortunate enough to be in a position to travel or to be a snowbird, there's, so many people here go to Palm Springs, go to Arizona, for little chunks of the winter or for
a little airport.
Yeah, because you go from Bellingham, you can go right from Bellingham to LA. You can go right from Bellingham to Mesa. So you can do these nonstop trips. Oh, is it nonstop to Palm Springs too, right? Yeah, it does. Yeah. So
except for I think they don't go in the summer, but other than that,
which makes sense.
Yes.
So you basically have these nonstop trips to sunny locations, which is, if you can afford to do that, it's a fabulous lifestyle to be able to go down there and for chunks of the winter. So absolutely, that's kind of a couple negatives that you can kind of work with. And then you also touched on the lack of entertainment. And, I think that, and you meant that as far as like, we're just not a large city, so we don't have...
we don't have the big venues. Yeah. And when we do have... I was a big music person, still am, love going to concerts. So when we do have maybe some bigger names who want to come here, it's like on a Thursday night or a Wednesday night. Like they're not coming here on a Friday or a Saturday. But we do have Vancouver, which I do love going up there for shows. And then we do have Seattle. Get a hotel, it's fine, but we don't have those big names coming here. No.
Yeah.
And we have a really cute downtown, and we have maybe a few good music venues, but nothing big that would even allow somebody like that to come here. But that's kind of the quaint nature.
You're not going to get Taylor Swift in Bellingham.
We're not getting Taylor Swift. No, we couldn't hold her.
Yeah, that's true. I think when I think about the entertainment side of things, coming from Seattle, on balance, I actually think I don't necessarily look at it as a negative, and I'll tell you why. So we have small things like the Bellingham Bells, right? Yep. So I would never have been going to a Bellingham Bells game if I lived in Seattle. I wouldn't care. I would only go to a Mariners game. But there's kind of a community charming thing about going to a college level, minor league level
we love
baseball
going
game.
To them. Yeah.
And then even I have a friend who moved up here who's really into all sorts of different, local bands and kind of smaller bands. And, and he's took me to a couple of shows with in super small venues of these bands that have decent followings. Again, things I maybe wouldn't do if I lived in Bellingham. And so I think that we have these kind of, small, and I've seen Ben Folds at Mount Baker Theater. You can see at Mount Baker Theater, you can see, so you kind of push yourself to maybe see some kind of smaller city entertainment, which can be just as cool sometimes. And then, but, going to Seattle, jetting down there, hour and a half drive, most of the people who live in the greater Seattle area, to get into those places, it's 45 minutes for them. If you live in Woodinville or Bothell, or you live in Burien or what, maybe not Burien, but if you live in these outskirts of the greater Seattle area, I'm sure if you're living in the outskirts, the suburb of Chicago, getting in is still kind of an ordeal. So it's only like, it's not that bad to bomb down to Seattle.
No, it's not bad. And it's fun. It's an experience, I feel like. Like, I am going to a concert, and so I have a friend coming into town. And so we're making a whole thing out of it and getting a hotel, and it'll be super fun.
Yeah, and you can also, you could do the train too if you want to really like not drive, and there's
rail. Yeah.
So, all right. So, but that was one of the negatives you added. And then I think probably the last one that I want to touch on, because we are realtors, is cost of living.
Yeah.
And cost of living is another relative kind of nuanced thing, right? But Bellingham, no doubt, is I think from a national average standpoint, an expensive place to live. What was your kind of analysis on that?
Well, I have a brother. He lives in Atlanta. So, if I compare it to him, our gas is more expensive. Our cost of living is more expensive with housing and things like that. But in Chicago, I would say our cost of living is higher compared to there, but then their property taxes are just out of control, and people are leaving Illinois because of the high property taxes. So I think that even though we do have a higher cost of living, our gas is more expensive, our food is more expensive, people are finding creative ways to combat it, like gardening or having electric vehicles or living close to town where you're riding your bike. And I think it's a payoff for the recreation that we get, for the scenic beauty that we get. But yeah, it is a little bit more expensive to live here. We live on the water. It's a college town. There is a bit of a payoff to living here.
Yeah, and I think that we've always stayed relatively less. It's still less expensive than Seattle,
for sure.
And with more and more people who can work remotely, although there's the push to go back to the office, there's still, without a doubt, a much higher percentage of professionals that can work from home. I just, in the way Bellingham is set up, the infrastructure wise, it just seems like something where if people are waiting for it to become less expensive, it's I just don't see it happening. There's just the quality of life that we're talking about with the scenic beauty and the breweries and the golf that I'm so happy about. No, but all of the benefits of the area in comparison to a bigger city.
Yeah.
You're going to have affluent people retiring here, and then you're going to have professionals that continue to want to live here, even if they got to work remotely. And then some high-paying jobs from the hospital, from the refinery, from other industry. And so it seems like just essentially because of the topography of the area and the way the city of Bellingham really has mapped out living, yes, they're trying to build more apartments. Yes, they're trying to build more multifamily to get more population in, but it's not going to solve the housing situation as far as, houses are going to be expensive here. And if you want to live near Bellingham, it's just like living near Seattle, and you got to, and if you can't afford it, it's Ferndale, it's Sudden Valley, it's Linden. It's just like in Seattle. It's like most people, they say they live in Seattle, but they live in Bothell, they live in this place, they live in that place. It's kind of like, that's kind of what's happening with Bellingham.
Yeah.
As the really suburbs are growing around Bellingham. Did you live in a suburb of Chicago, or did you live in Chicago proper?
Definitely a suburb.
Yeah.
And it's funny because one of my best friends is from Chicago proper.
Yeah.
And if I'm in public and I say I'm from Chicago, she'll call me out. She's like, no, you're not. It's very like a sensitive subject, but the suburbs of Chicago, the northwest suburbs, but just such a great, we could hop on a train in high school and take the train on down to Chicago. And I kind of wish it was more like that. Like, I wish we had a train that was like easier to take and go on down there. But just to have access to Seattle and have access to Vancouver. But I love it here. Like, I wouldn't trade this. It's just Chicago's a fun city, but like everywhere around it, it's very boring. Like, we don't have mountains. You're not going to go kayaking or go do lots of fun stuff outside. So you're spending a lot of money to do things. So I think, we do have that high cost of living, but you can be outside and doing recreation and not spending a ton of money on like entertainment and things like that, and have a really nice time living here and be very healthy too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, we didn't even talk about that. One of the pros is we have the cleanest air. I think we're always rated in the top 5 for cleanest air for mid-sized cities in the country. So
I didn't even know that.
Yeah. So that's another little fun fact.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, and you mean like the train system in the East Coast in general is just way more, because there is a train that, you could take down to Seattle, but it's not the infrastructure is not there the same way it is in the East Coast.
Yeah. Because I think the suburb system was set up out there so you live in the suburbs and you work in the city.
Yeah.
And we're just not doing that anymore. Like, there's a lot of people who maybe work in Seattle but are able to live up in Bellingham now.
Yeah.
So I don't think we necessarily need that system, but it was very convenient.
Yeah. It's almost like you work from home 4 days a week, then maybe you drive up to Seattle in your car once a week, and that's pretty much, what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then if you work in Bellingham, and you can't afford Bellingham, then, right now, the commute in from just about anywhere is very reasonable in Whatcom County.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's Blaine, Birch Bay, Everson, you name it, depending on, and all of those surrounding communities all offer their own kind of benefits to live in as well. Blaine and Birch Bay, we talked about rain. Blaine and Birch Bay, Birch Bay is in a rain shadow, so you get less rain if you're in Birch Bay or if you go out towards Anacortes. And so, so very good. Well, I think that pretty much covers it. I don't want to cover every positive and negative because I want people to go to your YouTube channel and check out your videos too.
Yeah.
Because you've made some really cool ones. But if you have more questions or interest in moving to Bellingham, please reach out to Dani. Thank you for joining us, Dani.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching or listening, you guys.